Okay, I'd like to take a couple of minutes and just walk you guys through the process of modeling a very simple eye once again. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is get started with just a sphere. All right, now let's go ahead and hop over to the channel box. And the polysphere, we don't need to have this, quite this degree of subdivision, axis and height. I'm actually going to set this to 12 and 12. All right, and then what we'll be doing is we'll actually be using the the residual geometry to kind of set up where our pupil and where our iris will be going here. So I'm just going to rotate that 90 degrees. All right, and come right down in here like this. And what we're going to do now is we'll actually use these faces right in through here to establish our iris. But before we do that, I'm going to just select this in object mode, and I'm going to duplicate it. And I'll take this duplicate, and I'm just going to hide it. Yeah, we'll need to come back to that a little bit later, and we'll use that to actually establish the clear part of our eye. So let's go into select faces mode. Actually, I'm going to go into paint select faces. All right, I'm going to select these right here. Okay, and this will end up constituting our iris, or not our iris, but rather our pupil. So I'm just going to move this back just a little bit, and I'll go ahead and scale that down just a hair. Actually going to scale that in so that it's all nice and flat. Push it back just a little bit like so. All right, let's go ahead and grab the Insert Edge Loop tool, and I'll insert an edge loop right in here, just to kind of help control the concavity of our iris just a little bit, like that. Okay, and I'll grab another edge loop and just insert it right there around the edge of the iris. So I'm going to smooth preview mode. We end up with something that looks like this. We still have our sphere, but then we end up with just a little bit of a cup. All right, and now let's go into, we're going to go back in and reselect those faces. All right, and I will extrude those inward. Okay, because in reality, what produces the black for the pupil is the fact that it is a hole in the eye. So I'll just go ahead and extrude that back there, so we get those types of shadow shapes. Okay, so now that we've done that, you can see if we go into smooth preview mode, it creates a little too soft of a transition. So once again, I'll grab the Insert Edge Loop tool and insert an edge loop, just skirting the edge of the pupil. All right, so we end up with something that looks like that. And if you feel so inclined, you can also insert one right back in here like so. Okay, the next thing that we need to do is let's go ahead now and hop into the Hypershade. And I'm just going to create a new Lambert material. I'll double click on that so that it opens up over there in the attribute editor. And let's go ahead and go to the color channel, click on the create input node, and I'm going to, let's see, I can't remember if it is, yes, it's a PSD file, so we'll create a PSD node. Go ahead and click on the folder, select the checkered face.psd, hit open. All right, and we'll go ahead and apply that to our eye. All right, I guess I just need to turn the textures on. All right, now I don't know exactly why Maya 2015 does this. It has this weird transparency issue. But I'm going to go ahead and right-click on the transparency channel and break that connection so that that transparency glitch goes away. All right, we end up with something that's looking a little bit like this. Right now, what we want to do is we want to remap some of the UVs, particularly around the the iris and the pupil. All right, so I'll go ahead and grab those faces with the paint select. All right, I'm gonna extend my selection. I'll turn off my textures there so I have an easier time seeing what I'm trying to do. All right, I'm gonna extend my selection a little beyond the iris, pick up part of the sclera of the eye, or rather the whites of the eye. All right, and also where that starts to transition into the pupil. And let's go ahead now and do a planar map, and we'll actually shoot this map down the x-axis. So let's go ahead and project that, and then open up our UV texture editor. Let's see, I'll just make this a little larger, zoom out just a hair. Let's go ahead and dim the texture by clicking on this icon right here. All right, and let's take that and just scale it down a little bit. Turn our textures back on. All right, so we have an easier time actually painting that texture in Photoshop. All right, now I'm going to grab the faces that are associated with the pupil. I could either grab those right over here in my viewport, or I could just grab the associated faces right over here in my UV texture editor. And I'm also going to do a planar projection on that. All right, now you'll notice that there are some overlapping faces, but I'm not necessarily concerned with this because they're all just going to end up being black. Yeah. All right, yeah, you can see the overlapping faces right here where the texture is stretching so extremely. All right, but let's go ahead and select this now, and in theory, I should be able to click on polygons and come down to layout, and that'll do a decent job with laying out my UVs. So now if you don't end up with something that looks like this, what I'd recommend that you do is just kind of manually position them. And it would be easier for you if you end up positioning them, all right, in a manner where it's going to minimize the amount of overlapping that you might encounter as you're placing your textures on these objects in Photoshop, or on these sections of the model in Photoshop. All right, so let's go ahead and select the eye in object mode now. All right, so now we have, it's a little bit more of a cylindrical projection for the body of the eye, right? The planar projection for the iris, or where the sclera, transitions into the iris, and then also for the back of the pupil right here. All right, and so I'll click on polygons. I'm going to come down to UV snapshot, and what will happen is this will end up saving the UV snapshot in my images folder because I've set my project. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the image format to a TIFF, and I'm going to set this as a 2K map. So I'll do 2048 by 2048 and go ahead and press OK. And if everything is happened correctly, we should get a confirmation of that down here in the status bar in the lower right. So I'll just go ahead and hop over to Finder and go to my images folder, and there we have the outuv.tiff that I can then go ahead and drag down into Photoshop. All right, and it will open up like this. I'll go ahead and double click on the background layer. All right, and then using Command or Control I will invert those values and then set this to multiply so we can use this to paint underneath. All right, so create a new layer. Now also, if you go back to the project folder that I had you download, you can go ahead and take a look in the source images folder, and you'll actually find an iris texture. Go ahead and take that and drag that down into Photoshop as well. All right, and copy that and paste that here into your document. And what I'll do is I'll just use the free transform to scale this down and position this relative to the art, or to the UVs for the iris. Now remember, we kept a little bit of sclera, which is the white part of the eye. So I'll put that out about that far. All right, where the edges of my iris are lining up, not with the points, but rather with the edges that represent that transition from the iris into the sclera. Now something else I'm going to do is I'll just really fast create a new layer, and you can see that, sorry, today's kind of like one of those days where you can't walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. Apparently I can't try a circular selection with the marquee tool and talk. I'm going to just make a selection right around here close to the pupil, because we can see that the artwork for my iris doesn't go all the way to the edge that indicates the transition from the iris into the pupil. So I'm going to just select that and do a fill. Actually, for right now, I'll keep that fill white. All right, go to free transform, and I'm going to scale this down just a little bit. Somewhere within this realm. All right, I'll make that black again, and then if you wanted, you could just add a really simple blur to this, just to kind of help soften that transition. All right, now let's go ahead and flatten that down into our iris. I'll go ahead and name the layer iris, and let's create a new background layer, and let's go ahead and give that one a white fill. Right, on this new background layer, let's go ahead and do a black fill behind the pupil. All right, and let's just go ahead and save this and apply this to our object real fast. So I'll just go to Save As. All right, and I'm going to save this to my source images folder. We'll just call this I_diffuse. We can leave that as a TIFF. We can leave that as a PSD, whatever you prefer. I'm going to go ahead and save this one as a PSD. All right, and actually, let's just toggle off the visibility on our UVs. All right, and hop back over to Maya now. All right, close the UV editor. Now I will create a blend material. All right, go ahead and double click on it so it opens up in the attribute editor. If that's not already the case, go ahead and click on the create input node next to the color channel. Select the PSD file. Go ahead and browse the location of that. I'll select I_diffuse. And let's go ahead and apply this to our eye. Now we're probably going to have the same issue with that weird transparency thing. So let's go ahead and break that connection. All right, and go into smooth preview. All right, now we're starting to end up with something that looks like an eye. All right, there's some weird little artifacting going on right in here, so we may need to actually increase the size of that pupil that we started to paint. Started to paint on the texture of the iris. All right, but it also looks a little on the cartoonish side, having the sclera be exclusively white. Now, right back in here, somewhere in this area, we actually start to translate from a sclera into a muscle. And it doesn't just go from white into kind of this reddish pink. It goes through a yellow color before going into that. So we'll just use the gradient tool to paint some of those colors in Photoshop. So let's just toggle back over to Photoshop real fast. All right, we can zoom in a hair. I'm actually going to take this selection right here, and you can come down to modify, and you can actually expand that. Let's try by 5. Oh, that might be a little too much. Let's try select, modify, expand. Let's try expanding that selection by 3. All right, and let's go ahead and do a fill right there. All right, save that real fast. Come back over into Maya. All right, let's reload this. Break that transparency connection. All right, so we've kind of got rid of that little bit of artifacting. All right, I'll just go ahead and take that iris now, and I'll blur it just a little bit. This time I'm going to do a Gaussian blur with maybe a radius of 2. Hit OK. Okay, there we go. All right, let's go ahead now and turn our UVs back on, created another layer, and I'm going to grab a slightly orange, kind of slightly desaturated yellow. All right, and grab our gradient tool. Now, if you don't see the gradient tool, go ahead and click and hold down on the paint bucket so the gradient tool pops up. And what we want is right up here is go ahead and click on this little gradient swatch, and we don't want to have it gradiate from one color into another. We want to have it gradiate from one color into a transparency. All right, and so then what I will do is start painting in that yellow. All right, now we don't want to have the yellow gradiate all the way to the edge right here, or we'll end up with a noticeable seam between where these UVs line up with those UVs. All right, but I'll go ahead now and create another layer, and let's go ahead and select a nice kind of slightly desaturated red. All right. Okay, so I'll do something like that. Now, if you wanted to feature veins in your eye, what you could do is you could actually paint the veins coming from the sclera through this yellow and into this red, kind of more muscular sheath that goes around the back of the eye. Well, let's go ahead and turn off our UVs and save this. All right, come over to Maya, go to the color channel. All right, cool. Looks like it loaded on its own. All right, we're getting something that's looking a lot more like an eyeball. All right, now if you wanted to, you could play around, go back into Photoshop and play around just a little bit more with those two gradients. So I could go ahead and select both of them, hit Command T. I kind of bring them forward just a hair. Now I'll come back here. Actually, I'll grab the rectangular marquee tool, and fill that back in with that red. Save this. All right, there we go. All right, now remember that previous sphere that we had. Let's go ahead and hit spacebar, click on display, come down to show, and we'll show the last hidden. What we're going to do is we're going to use this to create the conjunctiva for our eye. All right, now the conjunctiva is actually the transparent skin that goes over top of the iris and the pupil. All right, now if we just hit 3 on this, go to smooth preview mode, you can see we're going to start running into a little bit of conflict with the actual eyeball itself. So what we'll need to do is scale this up just enough to where it fully encases the eyeball. All right, now what I'm also going to do is I'll grab the Insert Edge Loop tool, and I'm going to insert an edge loop right about in here. All right, now this just so happens to coincide with the original edge loop that we inserted for the iris itself. But this time, instead of creating this concave shape, what we're going to do is we're going to make it turn into a little bump that protrudes away from the eye. So it's going to be convex. So let's go in the paint select tool, and we'll select these faces right in here, actually. All right, let's do that again. Yeah, the reason why I did that is because the edge that I just inserted was still selected. But we'll go ahead and actually pull this forward to be convex. The reason why we're doing this is because if you close your eyes and you place your hand on your eyelid, move it around, you can actually feel where your pupil is because it protrudes a little bit. Now it's this little protrusion that actually picks up that specular highlight that ends up coinciding with the iris so beautifully. So let's insert another edge loop right in here so we can just kind of round that out a little bit. Maybe pull it forward just a little bit more. All right, so that we end up with something that looks roughly like this. And if you wanted to, you could play around with the size of the scaling. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're just going to apply an MIA glass material to this. Actually, I just want to tweak the size of that edge just a little bit more. There we go. All right, so to do that, to apply that glass shader, let's just go ahead and come over to this field in Hypershade and type in MIA, click on the MIA Material X. All right, so that pulls up here, double click on it so that it's open in the attribute editor. Go ahead and click on the preset and come down, and we'll go ahead and do glass physical, and we'll do replace and apply that to the eye. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and just pull the camera back a little bit, and I'll do a render now. I'll bring up my render settings. Want to make sure that we're rendering in Mental Ray. I turn up the quality just a little bit from 0.25 to maybe 0.75. Make sure that we have Final Gathering turned on. Come over to the Commons tab, and I think what I'm going to do is I'll do a 1K square render. But in order for this to work properly, I'm going to just double click on my perspective camera, set my aperture to 1 by 1, turn on my film gate, and go ahead and do that render. All right, so there we go. It's just really basic eye. Or if you want to play around with it just a little bit more, what we can do is we can actually create things like a spec map. We could create a bump map, several other things like that, just to kind of help control, just the quality of the eye, give a little bit more interest to it. And I'll go ahead and walk you through that process right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back over to Hypershade. And actually, let's leave this alone, and let's hop back over to Photoshop and come over here to what we're doing in this area. And let's go ahead and take all these layers right here, and I will group them into a diffuse group. Okay, I will duplicate this diffuse group, and let's call this one specular. Okay, now in the specular, I don't need to have these gradients, so let's go ahead and delete them. I'm going to take this background image, and hit Command U, so it brings up the hue saturation. I'm actually going to turn, I think that I'll turn that all the way down to 0, or to negative 100 for the lightness. All right, and what that's going to do is, well, I don't know if I want to go quite that far. Maybe negative 75. And what it's going to do is where it's a starker gray, it's going to make the body of the eye, or the sclera, less reflective. Right, so let's go ahead and hit OK. And now with the iris, I want to convert that to grayscale. So with the iris, I'll just go ahead and hit Command-Shift-U to desaturate that. Let's make this background image just a little darker, kind of to the tune of about right there. All right, and then coming back to the iris, I'll just bring up my levels. All right, and do something about like this, because where it is white, it will be more specular and more reflective than where it is dark. All right, so go ahead and hit OK with that. Now, additionally, what I want to do is I'm going to take this specular folder and let's duplicate that and call this one bump. All right, and what we'll do is we'll create a bump map based off of this. Now, this background layer, what I want to do is I want to do a fill of a medium value. All right, so in this particular case, I believe the medium value is somewhere in the ballpark of 125 on the RGB channels. So we'll go ahead and do that fill right there. And now where it is those values, we're not going to have really much, we're not going to see much in terms of whether it appears to protrude forward or recede backwards. What's going to happen now is with the iris art, where we have the iris, it's going to appear to recess into the eye, all right? And so where it's black, it's going to appear to recess in, whereas white, it's going to appear to kind of come forward just a little bit. And we can control, the degree of which it recesses in or protrudes forward through some settings right in Maya. So I'll go ahead and take these two layers and collapse them down and name those bump. All right, we'll do the same thing with the specular. Collapse those down, call this one spec, and then in diffuse, we'll go ahead and collapse those down, and I'll name it diffuse. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm just going to resave this, and I'll just call it texture.psd. Hit save. Okay. Let's go over here into Maya. And now I'm going to just minimize this node editor right here. We won't really be using that at all. What we'll do is we'll use this work area immediately below the material shelf. So let's go ahead and double click on the blend. So that's what opens up in the attribute editor. And then right under graph, you see this little icon that has a right arrow square with two triangles. All right, that shows your inputs and your outputs for that particular material. And in the work area, we'll just zoom out a little bit because now we're going to start connecting stuff up and seeing it appear right down in here. So what I'm going to do is for the specular color, let's go ahead and click on that input node. And I'm going to select the PSD. I'm going to click on the folder, come down to i_texture.psd and hit open. All right, now because we save things in the particular folders, what we can do is we can actually link to a particular folder to pull the exact data that we want for this. So I'll go ahead and select specular. All right, leave the alpha to default. And what that should do, actually, let's just, down here in my work area, just kind of keep things organized a little bit better. All right, so let's take a look at the reflect or the specular color. So that's looking fine. And if we start to kind of mouse this around, you can actually see that the iris is a little bit more reflective of that light. All right, whereas the pupil ends up being matte. All right, and just kind of creates a little bit of a cool effect with the iris. All right, now let's go ahead and set up that bump map. So right here with the bump channel, let's go ahead and click on the input node and select the PSD file. All right, now it hasn't taken us exactly where we want to go as of yet. So over here in the work area, I'm just going to kind of reorganize this. We can go ahead and click on the PSD file node and click on the folder next to the image name. Let's select the I_texture, hit open. Gross. Let's go ahead and specify that we want the bump, want to select from the bump folder, so we're not pulling that data from the diffuse. And it looks really overpowering because now what we need to do is come to the bump 2D mode, and we need to change that bump depth down to something like 0.1, if not more. All right, so that's too much. Let's try 0.025. All right, we just want it to be kind of subtly there. All right, maybe we'll increase that just a little bit, 0.05. All right, I'll leave it right there like that. Okay, and the last thing that I'm going to do is double click on the blend material again. I'm going to come over to channel, and now I'm going to select the I_texture for that, hit open. Now the reason why it looks like this is because the topmost layer in that appears to be our bump. What we're just going to do is we're going to link the layer set to the diffuse. All right, then we'll come back out to the just to the regular blend 1 tab, and we will break that connection with the transparency. All right, and we end up with something that looks like this. All right, so I'll go ahead and do another render. Actually, I'm just going to save this real fast, just in the event that it crashes. Okay, let's go ahead and do this other render. All right, and there we go. I'm relatively satisfied with how this is turning out. Right now, I just want to show you one last thing, and I might need to play around with it real fast because just to make sure that I set this up correctly. But let's go ahead and close out this render view. All right, looks like I need to break that stinking transparency connection once again. All right, so let's go ahead and select these two parts of the eye. So we have the eyeball itself, and then we have the clear conjunctiva on top. And let's combine those. So go up to mesh, come down to combine. All right, so that Maya treats this as one object. Let's just center that pivot right there. Go into the channel box editor, and I'm going to drag this over about +5 on the x-axis. Now I'm going to make a duplicate and bring that over here at about -5. You know what? I just think that's a little too far for the spacing on these. Let's try -3 and +3. Now it feels just a little too close together. We'll go with 4 and -4. There we go. We'll just pretend that is that's a perfect width. Let's go ahead now. I'm going to go to the curves tab, and I'm going to draw an elliptical curve here in my scene, and I'm just going to zero out the x, y, and z coordinates on the graph, and then I'll rotate this 90 degrees on the x-axis, and pull that out just a hair like so, maybe raise it up just a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to turn this into kind of an animation handle of sorts. We're going to make this into a target that the eyes actually point at, so that then we can actually control the direction in which the eyes are looking. So I'm going to hop over from the polygons to the animation section of Maya, and we're going to create a constraint here. I believe it's the aim constraint. So I think we select the handle and select the eye and click on constrain, come down to aim. Let's see, might need to go into the options box. I think we need to maintain the offset. Let's hit apply there. All right, now let's select the handle, select the second eye, and do the same thing right there. And now what will happen is whenever I take this handle and move it around, right, those eyes are going to follow. Or if I bring it right over in here and push it in between, we can make it go cross-eyed. It's just kind of a fun little thing that you can do with your eyes. So you can, if you position them in the character's head and you want to have it kind of looking up and to the right or something like that, to give a little bit more personality to your head model, you can do so. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that, and good luck. Once again, this is just a really simple way of being able to do and set up the eyes, and I hope this helps you.